to the MIT Sloan Expert Series, which brings you an inside look at some of the most exciting new ideas and research happening at MIT Sloan. I'm your host, Rebecca Knight. In this special three-part installment of the Expert Series, we are looking at the future of the sports industry. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the business implications of the COVID-19 health crisis. Helping to make sense of things is Ben Shields. He is a senior lecturer here at MIT Sloan, a former ESPN executive, and the author of The Sports Strategist and The Elusive Fan. Thank you so much for being here, Ben.
It's my pleasure, Rebecca.
So, Ben, let's dig into the business implications of the health emergency and talk about how it's affecting teams and leagues' finances. Let's start with attendance. Pre-COVID-19, a lot of teams struggled with filling up their stadiums and their stands. And now, based on social distancing guidelines, it's going to be hard to attract fans, and it frankly might not even be safe. So what are some of the things you're hearing and seeing out there?
You're right, Rebecca. Even before the pandemic, it was a real challenge to get people to leave their homes to attend sporting events. The cost, both in terms of time and money, was increasingly prohibitive for some fans. So the question is, how do we get fans back to the venues in a post-COVID world? The answer, in part, is going to be not the way we used to do things. We've got to innovate to respond to this challenge. First and foremost, there's got to be a significant focus on health and safety, and we're certainly seeing that already in the sports industry. Fans have to feel comfortable that when they go to the venue, that their health is going to be taken care of. The Miami Dolphins, for instance, have made some news around their efforts at Hard Rock Stadium to ensure that there's social distancing when fans come into the venue, to make sure that there's contactless delivery with concessions, even when they leave the venue, social distancing as well. So first and foremost, health and safety is absolutely critical, and we'll see innovations there. A second concept that I think is interesting is around satellite stadiums. This is a concept my co-author Irv Rain and I have been researching. The question is, if we can't get fans to come to the stadium, how can we bring the stadium to fans? The best example of that today is, for instance, a sports book where fans can go and make bets and watch games as they unfold. But I think there's a lot of interesting work to be done around creating smaller spaces which take less time to get to, but then also provide a technology experience that fans can't get at their homes. It's a really interesting area of innovation that I think we'll continue to see going forward in the industry. Finally, on attendance, I realize this is a point that may seem a little out there, but telepresence technology is advancing. I've taught with a telepresence robot in my classroom at MIT, and I think there's some really interesting innovation opportunities around having fans attend a game via telepresence. I mean, it might make courtside seats that much more interesting and perhaps less expensive for fans that can't afford them.
So it would be a robot sitting in the seat courtside, and you'd get to watch it at home from the comfort of your couch.
That's one potential application. Again, that's what I have experienced as an instructor at MIT with telepresence robots in my classroom. But you could easily imagine 3 to 5 years down the line how that type of technology could be applied to sporting venues. Bottom line is, the way that we attracted fans to attend games in the past may not necessarily be the antidote to getting them back in a post-pandemic world.
So Ben, TV is another really important consideration here. Do you think we're going to see more people cutting the cord with the rise of direct-to-consumer?
Look, attendance is such a critical revenue stream for the sports industry. Some sports organizations rely on attendance almost exclusively for revenue. For large sports leagues and organizations, the media revenue, though, is the most important stream. And what we've seen, at least thus far in the pandemic, is given some of the economic hardships that people face, there has been more cord cutting in the last quarter than ever before. All this means is it's accelerating the disruption in media that was already happening, in part due to the rise of direct-to-consumer services like a Netflix, like an Amazon Prime, Hulu, Disney+. What does that mean for sports? In my opinion, it only hastens the need for not only sports leagues and organizations, but also teams and even athletes to become media companies. Everyone is a media company now. And what that means is managing a portfolio of content that you create, distribute to different partners or on your own platforms that you own and operate, and ultimately coming up with monetization strategies, either through sponsorship or subscription. Every team, league, player is now a media company. And in fact, when there's no games, we've seen that trend on display here, where we are connecting with our favorite teams and leagues primarily through social media. That's only going to continue in this post-pandemic world. Teams, leagues, and players as media companies.
How about sponsorship? So the COVID pandemic has led to an economic crisis of historic proportions. Companies are facing an uncertain future, and as a result, cutting their ad budgets. What's the impact here?
This is another story where if you have no sports, if you have no live sports, you have no product. And certainly the sponsorship revenue stream is under pressure again. Now, getting companies to come back and spend, I think it's going to put the onus on sports organizations to not only help them measure the value of their sponsorship dollars more effectively, but also come up with more creative solutions. We saw a really interesting creative solution during The Last Dance on ESPN. For those of you that haven't watched The Last Dance or aren't familiar with it, this is the documentary about Michael Jordan and the 1997-98 Bulls that ESPN fast-tracked so that fans could have something to watch during this time. But they created, with State Farm, an ad using deep fake technology that made it look like Kenny Mayne was predicting some of the future, even back in 1997-98. It was one of those ads that caught the attention of everybody that was watching and then resulted in significant attention for State Farm. Point is, ad budgets are being brought back, as you mentioned, Rebecca. When sports spending happens again, I can assure you that companies like AB InBev, Procter & Gamble, all the big spenders are going to be saying, how can we value our sponsorship spend more scientifically, and how can you deliver better creative solutions? That's definitely going to happen in post-pandemic world.
But another trend you've observed is companies, sports leagues managing to a double bottom line.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sports has always been, I guess, thought of as maybe just a distraction or an entertainment. And what we've seen throughout the pandemic is that sports is a pillar of our society. Sports is not only a big business in the industry, it's also, importantly, a source of social impact. We've seen things like the All-In Challenge, for instance, the NFL raising millions of dollars, but there have been some really interesting projects where sports are a part of the solution.
So Ben, I actually now want to bring in another voice into this conversation to segue what you've been talking about. I'd like to welcome Pat Symonds. He is the Formula One Chief Technical Officer. He is joining us from Oxford, England. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Pat.
Hi, it's a real pleasure to be with you today. Strange circumstances, but I'm sure we'll have a good session.
Indeed. Well, we want you to tell us about how Formula One is navigating this crisis. But before we get started into that conversation, I want to ask about something that Ben was talking about earlier, managing to this double bottom line, thinking about social impact. Tell our viewers a little bit about Project Pitlane.
Yeah, Project Pitlane, I think, emphasized so many of the things that are so great about Formula One. When this crisis started, we were approached by government to see if we could help with building ventilators. There was a shortage of ventilators in the UK at the time. So the timelines are really remarkable. I got a call on the 17th of March from Innovate UK, which is it's a government agency that promotes high-value manufacturing, innovation, engineering sort of expertise within the UK. And they said, can you guys get involved? So I thought we could. That was on a Tuesday. Made a few phone calls over a couple of days, and on Sunday, Sunday the 22nd of March, we had a meeting at the Red Bull Formula One team's headquarters. We'd got 6 of the 7 UK Formula One teams involved, and we looked at a project. We looked at several projects, in fact. We looked at some of the existing ventilators that were very effective, but they were really low production. You know, the requirement for ventilators pre-COVID was sort of 2 or 3 a week, and that's what these companies were making. So we put people in there to help to modernize their manufacturing. We had to reverse engineer a lot of the equipment and look for, you know, some of the very high value manufacturers that we use in Formula One to assist with it. We also, perhaps slightly more interestingly, we took a project which at the time was called Remora. It became known as Blue Sky eventually. And I would say that this was at the sort of TRL2 level. You know, there was a very, very basic demonstrator of the device that the guy who had thought about it, he was a clinician, and he was actually looking for a low-cost, simple ventilator for military use. And he'd put together a little bit of a prototype using parts from a radio-controlled car, believe it or not, and servos from that and things. So we looked at it, as I say, probably at TRL2. I would guess, you know, it was 2 years from production. And, well, within 19 days, we had it ready for certification. We had a plan to build 1,500 of them. We'd acquired the hardware. We'd gone through R&D testing. And, of course, certification of medical devices is pretty intense. So there was an awful lot of things we had to learn along the way. But incredible project to be involved in. A lot of people working sort of 15 to 18 hours a day on it, 7 days a week. It really showed everything that's good about Formula One.
And Pat, what's really interesting too is that, you know, these are teams and competitors on the weekend during the season, and yet everyone came together around this common cause.
Yeah, they did. And yeah, it's quite an interesting thing because, of course, it's a very competitive environment, Formula One. That's the definition of sport. And therefore, there's always a fair level of secrecy and intrigue involved.
So, Pat, tell us a little bit about, I mean, the conversation that I just had with Ben, all about the different challenges that teams and leagues are facing and trying to navigate during this pandemic. Can you give our viewers a sneak peek inside some of the conversations that you're having with your Formula One team about how you plan to move forward?
Yeah, it really is. It's a difficult problem, you know, because we're an international sport. So we have to move across frontiers, through borders, and we have to respect local laws, as well as the sort of worldwide things that are going on. Now, in addition to that, we really have two faces to our sport. You know, we have the spectators coming to the race, which is really important, and we have a television show to put on. Now, our sort of best attended races, like the UK and Italy, we'll get 250,000 people over a weekend coming to watch the race and the practice sessions live. But of course, that pales into insignificance compared to the sort of global television audience that we also have. Yeah, so we really have to think about both audiences, and of the two, of course, the difficult one is the live audience, because there's no doubt the season will start behind closed doors. So at the moment, we're planning to start the season in Austria in early July, and that will be behind closed doors. Now, we have an additional problem as well, because we can't travel to every country that we normally would like to travel to. You know, there are restrictions. And yet we want to get a decent race series in. So I very much doubt we will hit the 21 races that we plan to do this year. In fact, I'd say now it's impossible. But we really would like to get 15 races in, something like that, maybe more, maybe 18. And what that means also is that we need to be innovative. We need to stay in certain countries and do 2 races in a row. Now itself produces a whole load of new challenges for us, because while I think, a race is always going to be exciting, it's always going to be different. The fact is, if we race in Austria on July the 5th, and when we just repeat the whole process a week later, there is going to be a feeling of deja vu. And of course, what sports is all about is about unpredictability. So the last thing we want is to have that, well, here we go again, this is a rerun of last weekend. That's not what we want to do. So we're having a lot of discussions about innovation and how we can change the sport, particularly for these second races. Now, they often say you should never waste a good crisis, and I think this is a perfect example of actually how we may move the sport forward. Yeah, there are all the business things we've been talking about, you've been talking about, how we will change the way we live in the future. There's no doubt about it. But why shouldn't we change sport as well? And if it's a chance to bring in a little bit of innovation, then actually I welcome that, and I think we will learn from it. And as with all these things, whether the crisis is economic or health in this case, you always come out the other side a little bit leaner, a little bit fitter, a little bit more effective. And that's what we aim to do within our sport.
And do you foresee any lasting changes? You said that you hope to come out of this crisis a little bit stronger, a little bit leaner, more innovative, creative thinking that's already exemplified by Project Pitlane. But do you see any lasting changes once this crisis is a few years in our rearview mirror?
Absolutely. I think we'll see lots of changes. We'll see changes on the business front. We'll see changes in the sporting front. Now, on the business front, Formula One is a very, very expensive sport, and teams that are winning are spending sort of $300 million a year to win. There are only 10 teams, and the reason there are only 10 teams is because it is so expensive to compete. So the teams right at the back, they're still spending $150 million a year. But they're not getting anywhere with it, and that's something we've recognised quite a while ago as being a problem. It was a fundamental flaw in our business. So we started a process before COVID-19 struck to introduce a budget cap, and that work went well. It was something totally new, totally innovative within our sport. It was something that naturally led to a lot of opposition from the top teams, the teams who had the 300 million to spend and were winning races. They saw no reason to handicap themselves effectively. But our negotiations went on, and within this cap, we decided we would arrive at a figure of $175 million as being the cap on what could be spent. Now, I would point out that's not for everything, but it's for the technical side of the sport. It's the side that gives you performance. And pre-COVID, we were pretty happy that we'd got to that point. It wasn't where we wanted to start as the promoters of the sport. We felt the numbers should be lower, but we've managed to get agreement from the big teams at that number of $175 million a year. As soon as COVID came along and everyone realized, that there were these problems, not just the problems of not going racing, but the problems that Ben was talking about earlier of advertising and things like that, because, we rely a lot on sponsorship, we rely a lot on advertising. And I think everyone involved, all the parties involved through the regulators, ourselves as the promoters, the teams themselves knew that, life was going to have to be different. And so as a result, we've managed to get that $175 million a year down to $135 million a year. We've got a little bit of a glide slope into it, so next year we'll see 145 million. But nevertheless, a real fundamental change that will be everlasting and will make our sport much, much stronger, because it was getting very, very difficult for the minor teams to compete. So a really positive change, I'd say, that's come out of it. But on the sporting side, we are, I think, a lot more open-minded now. We know that we have to produce a product. We are going into competition after this dearth of sport, everyone crying out, they want to watch sport. And suddenly, in July, wow, which one are you going to watch? Because everything's going to kick off at the same time. In Germany, football has started. In the UK, it starts very soon, and they're big sports in Europe, as well as rugby, cricket, all these sort of things. So we've got to go in there and we've got to compete ourselves, and so we have to have a really good product. And that's why we've been looking at things like, what do we do with the race format? How can we make it more exciting? We don't want to take away from what is already a good product. Formula One has been immensely successful. It's $1 billion sport, and we don't want to lose that. But what we want to do is enhance it, and I think we have a chance now to do that.
One of the things that Ben and I have been talking about in this 3-part series is how this crisis has revealed a lot of challenges to sports business models that they faced before the pandemic, and how it's really forced them to innovate and get creative and experiment with different ways of improving their business models. It sounds as though Formula One is definitely seizing this opportunity and not wasting a good crisis.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And let me give you an example just in our operation of how we've done that. We produce all the television feed, the world feed, which each company that we sell a franchise to then takes. They add their commentary or their parts to it as they wish. So we have a very sophisticated broadcast studio that we carry to every race, and an awful lot of people who go along to operate that, to service it. When you see the replays, you see the clips, you see the telemetry data superimposed, the timing data, all that takes a lot of equipment, a lot of people. What we are doing now is we are doing a lot of that in a remote manner. Now, fortunately, we tested all this during the pre-season testing, which did take place before the first race was cancelled. And we are now carrying 100 tons less equipment to service our broadcast centre, and we're operating with 45% of the personnel on the ground, with the rest of them back at our base just outside London, operating from the studios there. Now that's a lasting advantage. That reduces our carbon footprint, it reduces our costs. It does many things. So again, the good things that do come out of this terrible crisis that we've been living through.
Well, Pat, thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's been really fascinating hearing from you.
It's a pleasure. It's great to talk to you, and I hope in the US you have a good sports summer and it all comes together.
We hope so too. Thank you. And thank you, Ben, for joining us too. And thank you for tuning in at home. To watch more episodes of this MIT Sloan Expert series on the future of sports, head to mitsloan.mit.edu.